Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this final session of today's sessions for the Massey Canadian Cities Summit. I want to acknowledge and thank Canadian Urban Institute and other partners for supporting us today, and introduce our fantastic panel. It is the panel you have all been waiting for all day long. Three mayors, three terrific mayors of three very interesting, vibrant, and different cities. So I'd like to first of all introduce Mayor Rebecca Alty of Yellowknife, who at least my screen is over on the right. Mayor Danny Breen of St. John's, Newfoundland, Mayor, and Mayor Lisa Helps of Victoria. We're literally spanning the country, coast to coast to coast, almost. So today's panel is about a city response to climate, but given the context we're all operating in as cities and mayors, I thought very important to speak before we speak about the climate emergency to the COVID emergency. Oh, and by the way, I'm David Miller, former mayor of Toronto and currently head of international diplomacy for C40 cities. So maybe if Mayor Alty, I could start with you. How are things going? How are the residents of Yellowknife dealt with COVID? How's it been on the city? And any thoughts and comments you want to have?
Sure, thanks, David. So first off, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking on Chief Dragi's territory, which is home of the Yellowknife's Dene First Nation. I would say, we've been working really hard over the past year. We've had quite a few public health restrictions to keep our numbers as low as possible, because we knew that if COVID came north, it would have devastating impacts in our healthcare system. So we're definitely starting to see the pandemic fatigue, and we're getting everybody over 18 is now eligible for the vaccine. And so now residents are like, okay, we want these restrictions removed, which isn't a municipal decision. That's at the territorial level. But, COVID's not over you if even though you're over COVID. And at the city perspective, stuff doesn't stop either. So we've been going full on for the past year to make sure we can continuing to provide clean drinking water, managing our waste properly, water, sewer, and recreation, which I think is really important to have the mental health component. So it's been a lot to juggle a pandemic along with regular day-to-day work, as well as all the other issues that were really important before we began. So climate change being one of the issues we talked about today, but it's a lot. Staff are getting pretty tired. We're trying to get back to a regular pace, but it's still pretty full on.
Certainly, I expect very full on for a mayor, despite having a background in city council.
For sure.
Mayor Breen, how's it going in St. John's?
Well, we started 2020 with a record snowstorm and an 8-day state of emergency, so that was kind of a warm up to COVID as we began that in about 6 to 8 weeks later. So we've been doing, I would say, very well. We've had a couple of lockdown situations. We're still in, I think we're in level 2 right now. So things are starting to get back to opening up. It's been a tough year economically. Aside from the health issues, which people are taking care of themselves, and we've been handling it very well. The oil industry, which is important to us, has taken a big hit this year, and that's hurt. We've had a provincial debt is a major concern. Our provincial government is having a lot of financial issues that they're dealing with. So it's been a pretty difficult 16 to 18 months for us. So. But we're resilient. We're getting there. The vaccines are starting to be rolled out. People are feeling positive now, as we head into hopefully the summer months coming soon, and we'll get through it by helping each other out like we always do.
I think to the rest of Canada, it seems like the Atlantic provinces have handled this pretty well as can be, I suppose. Does it feel that way in St. John's, or still pretty tough?
I guess for one of our disadvantages has always been the isolation and being a remote, almost island on the East Coast, and that's kind of worked to our advantage here. But it's also worked to our disadvantage economically. Our reliance on tourism, for example, has been hit very, very hard, and businesses are really struggling with that part. So health-wise, I think we've managed it very, very well. Economically, we're feeling the real economic impact of it right now.
And Mayor Helps in Victoria, how are things, and how has it been for the past year?
Yeah, I mean, just like the other mayors have said, it's been very challenging. I think Rebecca's point is an interesting one, just how hard our staff have been working and how tired our staff are from navigating through these unprecedented times. So I was remarking to our city manager the other day that it is quite something that garbage pickup didn't stop. Recreation centers reopened as soon as they could. Childcare, which is run out of city facilities, never closed down. Our parks are still maintained. And again, it's because I think on the island, just like the other island that Danny was talking about on the other end of the country, we've done pretty well. We haven't had a COVID outbreak in Victoria, in city staff, in our police or fire departments. So essential services, which are key to cities, have really been maintained. And maintained really well. And I feel really proud of it. I think sometimes municipal staff don't get the credit that they deserve, and our staff have done a tremendous job. But just like the other mayors have said, it's been very, very difficult on our businesses. We're just into another state. And again, it's provincial wide. They're not by region, unlike in Ontario. So shutdown of restaurants again, just as restaurants are gearing up for reopening for the summer. So yeah, it's been very challenging. And of course, people who were already vulnerable before the pandemic, even more vulnerable during that. And we've had to deal with quite a few people who are living outside and figuring out what to do with that as well. So yeah, challenging times. And I think there's hope on the horizon, but it's the variants versus the vaccines race. So we'll see.
I muted myself. Moderators aren't supposed to do that, I suppose. Mayor Helps, if I can turn to you first then on the question before us. There's a COVID emergency, there's a climate emergency. In the midst of dealing with COVID and issues like unhoused people and ensuring that municipal services continue, all the things you just mentioned, is it even possible to think about the climate emergency? And if so, can you give your comments about this moment and what we should be doing and what the role of cities is from your perspective?
Sure. Well, yeah, I think it's impossible not to think about the climate emergency. And as Rebecca says, just because COVID hit, it doesn't mean everything else has stopped. So the city declared a climate emergency early in 2019. We had a climate leadership plan adopted before that. But, one of the things that has kept us motivated to keep working on climate change is the fact, and again, I'll put it in the chat when I stop talking, there was a really good report done last May 2020 by Joseph Stiglitz, Nicholas Stern, and others about COVID recovery as green recovery. And basically, there's a warning in the preamble. I took it as a warning that if we think we've seen anything with the COVID emergency, the climate emergency is the same thing, but in slow motion. And that really has kept fire under us at the City of Victoria. So while we've been supporting our businesses and our residents in getting through COVID, we've continued to build out our bike network, which is huge in terms of reducing emissions from transportation. We've doubled our oil tank incentive to get people to get those oil tanks out, because that's 16% of emissions just through oil tank removal. We've continued to implement our zero waste strategy. So there's a lot more takeout, as everyone knows from living in cities. And so we've got finally those 3 different waste bins. we're building out our EV strategy. So yeah, so I could yeah, probably people are not going to be interested in a list, but COVID has not at all taken away the urgency to address climate change, and I think cities in adapting to COVID in some ways it goes hand in hand with how we address the climate emergency going forward. So happy to talk more about it, but no, we haven't slowed down, and I hope that cities across the country and around the world haven't.
Yeah, I think we'll come back to you about the list because I do think people will be interested, but maybe on the general question, we could turn to Mayor Breen. You're in a city that relatively recently in history became the heart of pretty significant oil production. How is St. John's and how are you thinking about the climate issue at this moment and going forward?
Well, we see the transition to a green economy, one that the oil industry is going to be playing a role in. If you look at the work that we've done with startups here in St. John's, the work that we've done with business incubation centers like the Genesis Center at Memorial University, and the expertise that we have in the ocean sciences, and that work that can be transferred to other industries. There's a lot of potential for us to move forward. So we actually think that there was COVID has given us the advantage of being able to get further ahead with our Resilient St. John's plan and our climate change planning moving forward, because we were able to take advantage of looking at some of the things that are around us. You know, we've put some money now into a new multi-purpose trail for bicycling that will go east-west in St. John's, which basically gives us a trail around 2/3 of the periphery of the city. We've looked at ways during COVID that we were able to enhance for residents to be able to walk, and we saw an uptake, for example, in bicycling. You know, the bicycle shops never saw the business that they saw during COVID here. So it's given us an opportunity to move some of those things forward. And as well, we have some major projects coming up in terms of secondary wastewater treatment. That's going to be taking on some new, we're going to be looking at some new technology. So we think there's a lot of great opportunities as we move forward.
And do you think, Mayor, is your sense of residents of the city that they're fairly engaged with this issue and see the possibilities of engaging in a positive way moving forward?
Yeah, I believe so. One of the key components to our plan is Engage St. John's, in which we're reaching out and engaging the general public, but as well our partners. And you know, these transitions and these projects don't take place without great partnerships being built, both in industry and government. And one of the big issues that the big steps that we've taken is to engage with our partners in the utilities and the research sector in the city to identify how we're going to move forward. When you look at things like electrification of our public transit system into the future and those big ticket items, you know, there's a lot of smaller projects that can be taken while we're trying to get those bigger ones taken care of.
Well, and I know that there's been some recent federal support, which maybe we can get to later, for the electrification of public transit, which is quite interesting globally. But Mayor Alty, maybe you can speak a bit about how climate is seen in Yellowknife, and you know, we all read about further north some really fairly serious impacts already happening from climate change, and your city's role in addressing it.
Yeah, and I think COVID, the one thing we've really had to do is, so we've got our community energy plan, which is focusing on reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. We've got our waste management plan, again, trying to reduce per capita, where we produce some of the most waste in Canada, and so also trying to reduce greenhouse gases there. And we've also this year had to update our zoning bylaw because we recently approved a new community plan. And So with the first two projects, the community energy plan, as well as our waste management strategic plan, Yellowknife's small. It's a population of 20,000. We don't have deep coffers. So when we're looking to make some of these big ticket changes, we need the support of the federal and territorial government. So it has been a bit more difficult this year to try to get their attention. You know, it's, hey, want to discuss this project, and it's, you know, okay, well, staff have been redirected to help on the COVID response. So we've really had to stop, relook at our projects and what we want to focus on, and just see what we as the city can do. So, you know, when it comes to the zoning bylaw, we are focused on more infill and density as opposed to the green sprawl. One of the challenges too that COVID's had is the engagement. So, you know, when you're updating your zoning bylaw, you should be out engaging with the public a lot. And so we had to delay it a bit to try to figure out what's the way that we can ensure that we're engaging as many residents as possible, because not everybody's on the internet. But that has also now meant that we're kind of a little bit farther behind. So there's more vaccines, so hopefully some restrictions. So when we get to the final stage of approving our zoning bylaw, we'll be able to have more in-person public engagement. But yeah, I think with the climate change, energy security is our big thing here in Yellowknife. Hydroelectricity is one of the city's main sources of energy, but our backup is or supplemented by diesel generators, and most of the other communities in the Northwest Territories are diesel. All the communities in Nunavut are on diesel, and so to get our communities off diesel, we need that federal and territorial support. And so it's kind of when COVID goes a little bit away and the territorial and federal government can focus on this again, I think it'll be key. There's so much that's done in the Scandinavian countries when it comes to district heating and cogeneration and pellet boilers that we need to start embracing and putting in place here in the north.
I'd like to follow up on the specifics, and there's a question in the chat maybe we can get to in a little bit, but can you talk a bit more about the feasibility of getting the near north, if I can call Yellowknife the near north, and the north off diesel? I know it's something I dealt with when I was with the World Wildlife Fund, and none of it. It's a really serious issue. It's expensive, it's polluting, and it's, you know, it's highly greenhouse gas generating. Is it going to be feasible with the right kind of federal programs? And if so, what's the current thinking about that?
There's a few things. There's a look at renewable diesel, which is instead of fossil diesel, it's made from plant oils and animal fat in a refinery. Is kind of a similar way to fossil diesel, but it's not made from crude oil. So there's that. There's a look at propane, but it is a pretty big challenge, because even if you've got a facility that is using pellets, and pellets we're starting to use so much that it's no longer a byproduct. People are actually clear cutting forests to create pellets. So that's not as renewable as we used to think of it. And there's, you know, the heat waste recovery that can come off the diesel generator systems that can be used, but you know, to get a more diesel efficient generator for these power plants, the federal government isn't willing to support that. They'd only support propane, but then there's you could have heat waste recovery to offset some diesel in other buildings in the community. So perhaps a more efficient diesel generator is actually a better use than a propane. So we don't always stop and look at the big picture. We just say, ooh, that's bad, want to get rid of it. But perhaps right now, minimizing is what we need to do, or being able to get renewable diesel, subsidize it to be the same cost as fossil fuel diesel.
Mayor Breen, are there some obstacles and challenges like that in St. John's and your part of Newfoundland that either federal support or technical innovation could help the city progress? And then maybe we'll get to Victoria's list with Mayor Helps.
Well, in St. John's, I mean, I think the big help is needed for cities really everywhere to deal with climate change is how we can generate further revenues to help us do that. The current revenue, the current financing structure of municipalities doesn't allow a lot of flexibility using property taxes. So I think just like in economic development, to do more economic development, there needs to be more varied revenue streams for municipalities, I think, to achieve some of the projects that we need to achieve to address climate change and in the greening of the economy and our services. We need to have better revenue streams to do that. And I think that's one of the things that holds municipalities back across the country, is their ability to have the varied revenue streams to make things happen. For our city, for example, 75% of our revenue comes from property taxes. So when we go through what we're going through now with COVID, the impact on the assessments and the property values will come through in a couple of years' time. And we saw big holes in our other revenue streams, like, for example, the tourism marketing fee levy. Went from, for us, a budget of $3 million to $300,000. So the expenses are still around for that, so you have to make it up somewhere. So I think at the core of this, financing is a big issue.
I suspect Mayor Helps wants to jump all over that, and maybe, Mayor, when you're answering it, you could look to the question from Ellen Kaspersky as well. But I know Mayor Helps is very interested in this issue of cities' finance and powers and its relevance to climate change and everything else. So, Mayor?
I won't go through the list in too much detail. I did put a link to the city's climate leadership plan in the chat. One of the things that we did when we built the plan was quantify the emissions so we would know what the low-hanging fruit is. And I'm not going to go through all of it, but 16% of emissions in the city, fully 16% comes from people heating their homes with oil. So that is low hanging fruit. If we reduce that, we're down by 16%. So we've started this incentive program. It's very unusual for a local government to give money directly to homeowners, but we partnered with the province, and there's quite a substantial, between the city and the province, it's about $5,700 to get to switch from oil to heat pumps. So that's a big one. 18% of our emissions comes from, we could reduce our emissions by 18% if we get 55% of people walking, cycling, and taking transit by 2030. So we're investing massive amounts in those kinds of things. So again, I'm not going to go through all the details, but I couldn't agree more with Danny. I think it's not just that cities need more money, but that cities, and I know this is kind of the question that we're going to get to later in the chat, so maybe I won't give it all.
Go.
You want me to go? Okay, I'll go.
Yeah, go.
I'll go. Well, okay, so it's not just that we need more funding, which certainly we do, because the property tax is a regressive form of revenue raising. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't grow with the economy. And I can see Danny and Rebecca both nodding. But with respect to climate change, again, the conference that this panel is in is the constitutional space for cities. And there's actually, I think, lots of room for cities within the Canadian Constitution to have more authority to deal with and reduce emissions, and it can't help but help the federal and provincial governments. If we have those authorities, we're going to help them meet their emissions targets. So just a couple of examples from Victoria, and someone said this was raised a bit earlier in the day. Our plastic bag bylaw. So we worked really hard. So first of all, these kids came from schools dressed up as one of them dressed up as a plastic bag princess. She made herself a costume out of all these discarded plastic bags she'd found, and stood up at council and asked us, please do something if you care about my future. And so we did. We worked really hard with the schools, with the Chamber of Commerce, with the Downtown Victoria Business Association, and we brought in this really the strongest plastic bag banning bylaw in North America. It wasn't just you have to use thick plastic. It's like you can use no plastic. And when you have reusable bags, they have to be of this quality. And it was really good and solid. And as soon as we passed it, lo and behold, this organization called the Plastic Bag Association of Canada, that I don't think existed before our bylaw came into effect, took us to court. And we won. The court said, no, this bylaw is within municipal purview. And then they appealed. And then at the Court of Appeal, the language that we used when we were arguing for the bylaw was more environmental than business related. So the Court of Appeal ruled on the side of the plastic bag people. And then we took it all the way, appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada went to the Supreme Court of Canada asking for leave to appeal, and they said no. And so all of this time, when we banned plastic bags, that reduced, for 1 year, it was in effect 17 million plastic bags not going into the landfill. And then the court strikes it down. And then, a lot of our businesses actually stayed with the bylaw. But that just, it illustrates the ridiculousness. And that's just plastic bags, never mind takeout containers, plastic cups, all of those other things we throw out every day. So there needs to be, and I could give other examples, I'll stop talking now because I want to hear from the others obviously as well, but there needs to be a fundamental shift in the role that cities are given, and it really is that given by provincial and federal legislation to allow us to tackle these things that are clearly within our everyday life, but not currently within our authority.
I could jump in because I'm like, God, the amount of waste that's being produced with COVID is a struggle with all the disposable masks that we're seeing, and they're floating around now too. The other thing that came in, and constitutional change is going to take a while, but if we can start working together better. So, the federal government legalized cannabis, and then the territorial government was the one that's distributing it. Now we have all these little plastic containers that you're just getting a little bit of marijuana in a giant plastic container that we as the municipality have to deal with. So, and with the, with the recycling challenges across the country, we're ending up with landfills now full of these plastic containers that aren't recyclable or aren't being recycled. So if we can start to work together more to address these issues, because they relate to us all, without having to go to court and challenge everything and change the Constitution. But if we could just start to work together more, it'd be great.
The court ruling drives me personally crazy, because there's a wonderful case in the pesticide bylaw out of Quebec that interpreted municipal authorities quite broadly. And given that we're responsible for waste management, one would think that taking measures to reduce waste as part of waste management were perfectly reasonable. I can't remember the Hudson case. Although when I was in office, we kept asking lawyers if we could use the Hudson case in multiple ways, and they kept saying, no. So who knows? Mayor Breen, do you have any comments about that aspect of things? There's the financial side, which I thought you put really powerfully, that, if a city has an economic development plan, it's going to grow income tax and sales tax revenues, but they all go to somebody else. So it's almost irrational for cities to actually grow jobs in that context. Do you have any comments about the jurisdictional issues and the competencies of cities and what might help achieve the goals that residents tell you they have?
There's a saying that's often used that the federal government has the money, the province has the jurisdiction, and the city has the problem. And that's really the way that it shakes down. And if you're not working in tandem with each other, and sometimes that disconnect, there has to be an understanding that the municipalities are powerful tools for delivering those services to people, and thus can deliver other things to people. If only we could sit down and put the jurisdictions aside and look at how we're going to deal with the problems that we have in front of us is the issue. But sometimes we get bogged down in making sure that there's equity throughout, whether it's a province or through a region, or and a lot of times we have these major funding programs that you can't even get into because your province may not be in a position to participate. That's why the gas tax is so popular, because it's money that's sent directly to the municipalities, and they deal with it, and municipalities know what the needs are.
Well, and it's a good sign that Ottawa is building on the gas tax. That's one of its responses to COVID. Lots of questions in the chat, so I might go to those. The first one you've all touched on, but maybe it's from Alan, so given he's sort of our host, we should definitely go to it for sure. One of the things he says is when things go wrong, and this is sort of picking up on Mayor Breen's point, the first people to get the telephone call or the email is City Hall. So can one or all of you talk about why cities are best placed to deal with the really complicated challenges that we all face? I think we've discussed the barriers a wee bit. This is a flip side. Why are cities places that can actually solve the problems? That's to any of you.
Yeah, I was like thinking outside of the climate change, just been struggling with a few housing issues here. And when the challenge when the program's developed nationally is each province and territory and each municipality is just slightly different. So knowing the local conditions and knowing what works. We all know what the problem is, but it's the solutions of, okay, yeah, we tried that, tweak. And it's not reinventing the wheel, but it's working with municipalities to see what's been tried and how it might work in that local context. I think is important because, yeah, we need the federal, we need the provincial and territorial support, particularly in the money aspect, but the solutions I think can be very localized, but should also be looked at the broader, we don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time, just tweak it.
Yeah, there's a lot of programs that we put together that could be used by the provincial government in the whole province, but we see them sometimes go off and develop their own program when you should have just called us. We could have given you ours, and you could have adapted it for the rest of the province, especially in our province where we're, St. John's and the Northeast Avalon area is probably 35 to 40% of the provincial population. So, those types of things, we don't often have a very good ongoing discussion. It happens kind of on a project by project basis, but we don't really integrate real well. And that's one thing that COVID has showed us here. We have a number of municipalities in close proximity, and we're beginning to work better together on things like economic development. We understand that good things happen in St. John's. They're good for the neighboring communities and the whole province. So we've got to work together and make it all work for each other. We're not in a position right now where we can work in silos.
I think that Alan's question is a really good one, because in some ways, and I'm an optimist, so I think all problems can be solved at the level of the city, but I've already harped on the resources necessary to do that. But I think the reasons, if not being able to deal with the wicked challenges at the level of the city without, as Rebecca and Danny have said, without senior levels of government pitching in, I think cities are relationship-based places. There's even though people complain sometimes about municipal bureaucracy, cities are agile and can act relatively quickly. Mayors can bring people to, and especially I want to put a plug in here for smaller and medium-sized cities, because that's the majority of us in Canada. The majority of us aren't the Torontos and the Vancouvers. And in small and medium-sized cities, there's room to pilot, to try, to fail quickly, to scale things that work. And I think cities are poised well. And I think mayors are poised well because of the relationships that we cultivate. And those relationships in COVID in particular, but also with climate change are really, I see relationships as currency, and it's that having those that's going to be able to help us be able to meet the challenges ahead, whether it's the remainder of COVID or the climate emergency.
Let's speak about a couple of those specific challenges that have been raised in the questions. One is following up on something Mayor Alty said about housing and infill. And it was interesting to hear Yellowknife leading on this issue. Question is, a lot of municipal climate mitigation plans ignore urban form issues, despite the evidence that density, design, diversity are very important to greenhouse gas emissions. Why do you think this is, and what can be done about it? I'm not sure any of you can speak to why your colleagues are doing or not doing something, but you have some thoughts about how built form, density, affordability, and these kinds of issues do relate to climate.
Well, definitely, well, Yellowknife's pretty walkable and compact compared to, because we have 2 former gold mines and then our lake and indigenous land claims. So we actually have a pretty small piece of land to work with in regards to development, but we've still taken the opportunity to sprawl, and people like their single detached dwellings and having space for their truck and their RV and their boats and toys. But the cost of living is difficult, and when we're in the single detached dwellings, your taxes are not paying for all of your services. So yeah, we're really focusing on infilling downtown, making it so that people are driving less, and also then being able to maintain and the nature preserve, and not having the we don't have all pavement and concrete, but being able to keep those nature reserves close to the city so that people are within a walking distance of their office, as well as some nature trails. So it's going to be a struggle to get through our zoning. Our community plan is focused on infill as opposed to greenfield, but the Not in My Backyard is already, we've got quite a few neighbors going strong that the apartments are going to create shadows and all the other things. The crime is going to increase in the neighborhood, all the regular infill comments. But at the end of the day, from a climate change and cost financial perspective, it's how we have to move forward. And I think it was the city of Kelowna or Nanaimo, Kelowna, that was just talking about the tip of the iceberg is the cost to develop, and it's the maintenance that's underneath that we're not looking at. So really looking at that full cost cycle analysis.
It's an interesting point connecting the costs, which doesn't seem to be properly done anywhere. Do the other mayors have any comments on that, on built form and how it relates to environmental and maybe economic sustainability as well?
Well, one of the challenges we have as the oldest city in North America, we have a lot of heritage issues, a lot of heritage properties, and we now have major changes happening within the churches, within the city with their properties, and disposing of those and having some of them redeveloped and going through the natural downsiding. So, it's a challenge because you have to maintain the heritage value on one side, which is really important to the city. At the same time, repurposing those properties and having them meet the standards that are needed in 2021. Cost associated with that and the cost of operating them is significant. So we are very keen on having more people live downtown. We don't feel enough people that are living downtown. Therefore, we don't have the amenities in the downtown that people need to live there and to be able to walk about. So trying to attract people and businesses downtown is a challenge, and we have a lot of heritage that we need to protect, and finding that balance is a huge issue for us.
You got a fair number of churches in St. John's there.
We do. We have an ecclesiastical district that's very, very close to the downtown, and it's the churches are all facing challenges, financial challenges, in keeping those going, and it's a major concern for us.
David, I'll just weigh on quickly on this, because the question says a lot of municipal climate mitigation plans ignore urban form issues despite evidence about density design and greenhouse gas emissions. Our climate leadership plan doesn't explicitly address urban form, but our official community plan definitely does. And so I think a lot of those, and this is what Rebecca's been talking about as well, a lot of progressive and recent official community plans point to land use in there, and then the climate leadership plans, at least ours does, build on that. But I think to Rebecca's point, and in the question, what what can be done about it. Many of these things, and there's a question about bike lanes below, which I'd be delighted to answer when we get there, is many of these changes require political courage. Like that is what it comes down to over and over and over again, to stare down a room, or now in this case, a Zoom call or Teams call of 25 people who come and say they're opposed to this or that. And passing it anyway, over and over and over again. Sometimes 100 people coming and saying, we don't support this development. Well, thank you very much for your comments. I really appreciate that. And also, what about the 150 or 200 people who are going to live in this building who aren't here right now to speak for themselves because they haven't yet moved to the city, or they're taking their kids to soccer practice, you know, whatever it is, don't have time to come to a public hearing because they're living their lives. And that is what is required to tackle some of these wicked issues is political courage, and it is exhausting, but it's necessary.
And I think on Lisa's point, or to the question again, you know, our zoning bylaw only gets updated every 7 or 10 years. So this is probably the first time that we've really had that climate emergency lens put on it. And so it's good that this is, that we're in the process right now, because Yellowknife was built not to last. It was a mining town. It was built on gold. So, you know, we're just replacing all our corrugated metal piping in our water and sewer because it wasn't really supposed to last. It's just like, once the mine's done, this town's going away. So a lot of our buildings now, we've got a stronger building bylaw that has those energy efficiency standards. We're now actually building our city to last, whereas previous to, you know, back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, it wasn't an idea that this is going to last forever.
It does. Both your comments link to another question here, which is about more internal, I think. Are there internal barriers to the success of sustainability? Do we need, you know, to change the administration a bit so sustainability experts, environmental experts are integrated into, you know, finance or somewhere where they have an overall look? The question is, do you have any thoughts so that sustainability isn't seen as a fringe department, it's seen as core? Any thoughts or best practices from any of the mayors or anything you've seen?
Well, our sustainability department is in our engineering department, which is where all the big infrastructure projects are determined. So we did have a standalone sustainability department. It was back when I was a counselor, and I fought really hard to get rid of it for exactly that reason. And to have, you know, our head of engineering, you know, our sustainability team reports directly to him. And that sends a pretty powerful message about the importance throughout the organization of where sustainability and climate action fit. So that was, I think, a good structural change that we made quite a few years ago now.
Yeah,
Our
sustainability department is in their public works department as an operational tool, but our sustainability plan is one across the whole organization. It speaks to economic stability, sustainability, housing, social sustainability, being an active city, the whole gamut. So it goes through each of our areas, and you know, all of them are linked, and all of them are challenging because there's a lot of challenges out there to be faced. But we need you need to make sure that you have everybody that's looking at all the different aspects of every issue that comes up with now, to see how it's affecting your climate change plan, how it's affecting your other sustainability issues that you have within your city, wherever it's housed. It's a citywide focus.
Our sustainable coordinators are also in the Public Works and Engineering department, but we've also just recently started our asset management plan and hired an asset management coordinator or manager. And instead of putting that person in the engineering department, the focus was to put it in corporate services to make sure that it's really applying to the whole organization and not just getting pegged as a public works role. It's really making sure that all employees are looking at the life cycle of our assets, from the fire hall to our community rec departments to our engineering and more.
Well, that does well, if there's time, I want to come back to something Mayor Breen said, but that does point right to one of the questions in the chat, which is about adaptation. And if I can add resilience to that. In the preparation chat or today in the panel, all of you have referred to weather events that are happening. Are your cities looking at having to adapt to changing weather patterns that probably are linked to climate change now? And if so, what are you doing? Is it costly and difficult? Are people with you? What can we say about that? Do you want to kick it off, Mayor Breen? I saw you nodding.
Yeah, well,
dangerous to nod.
I think pretty much everything we do now, we're taking the impacts of climate change in on those. And if you look at just some of the underground infrastructure projects that we have going on here now, we're on our fourth year of a 5-year phase of Water Street, our main street in the downtown. Kenmount Road, one of our major arterial roads and business districts, upgrading the underground infrastructure there just because there's just too much water in there to what's in there is unable to handle it. So these are expensive projects, and expensive in a city like St. John's, which has a lot of rock. That's why they call it the Rock. And when you're expanding something by a couple of feet in diameter, you got a lot of blasting to do to get in there. So, these are the effects of climate change are just everywhere you look throughout the city, either in front of us every day. Even sometimes we go out and we talk about to people, well, we had that great big snowstorm. Well, we've noticed that our temperatures are rising and our precipitation's increasing. So as your precipitation rises and your temperatures increase, then you're going to have more rain. The sea levels are rising. You're going to have, if in areas where you have breakwaters, you're going to, and wharfs, you're going to have problems. So people see the problems now more clearly than they did 5-10 years ago. And that's helpful in getting them to see some of the work that we're doing.
Order of magnitude, what is the sewer stormwater rebuilding program costing you compared to 1 year's city expenditures?
Oh, well, the two capital projects that we're doing now are both come out about $10 million this year for those phases. So they're our capital budget, capital out of revenue, is probably about 20 million. So they're big projects. Without the federal and provincial governments, we wouldn't be able to do them.
So equivalent of 50% of the capital budget for a project that's likely caused by climate change.
Yep.
Mayor Alty, I see you nodding. Dangerous to nod.
Yeah, I was like, we face a lot of challenges. So we've got changing permafrost, so really having to take that into consideration with new buildings and existing buildings, where before you thought the ground would be frozen solid, and now it's melting, and so you're having a bit of the building heave problems. So looking at whether there will have to be some changes to the building bylaw to address that. Forest fires are a big concern. We always think of Fort McMurray and Slave Lake and making sure that we're fire smarting our community. And again, looking to the zoning bylaw to see what we can do to create the natural fire breaks where we're most at risk in our community based on wind patterns. And then we're beside Great Slave Lake, which is one of the biggest lakes in Canada. And last year there was a rise of the water level and came flooding up in many properties. And so working with residents to make sure that they're prepared for these climate change events, and letting them know what they can do. So in regards to how can you fire smart your property, how can you, don't put that wood pile beside your house, because that can be a problem. and working with insurance companies, because those insurance premiums are really rising. So what are some of the actions that you can do to reduce your premiums, such as changing your roof to a metal roof? You can reduce your premiums because you're reducing your forest fire threat. So there's, I think we focus a lot on the municipality, and we'll have to start looking at what more support and education we can do to residents to ensure that their properties are protected too.
Yeah, I think listening to both Danny and Rebecca talk, I was kind of railing earlier about what municipalities don't have the power to do. And there's a lot of mitigation activities that if we had more authority, we could mitigate better. But adaptation, I think, is firmly within our bailiwick. And when we're doing some of the same underground work or changing bylaws to prevent housing close to the ocean and so on, our residents understand that. No one challenges it. They think this is prudent activity for my city government to be undertaking. And sometimes it's talked about in terms of climate adaptation, and sometimes it's just talked about in terms of necessary infrastructure maintenance, and no one bats an eye. So I think we've got some really real strengths there as cities in terms of adaptation.
It does, the comment about no one batting an eye does go back to an earlier question about cycling. And the question essentially was, how do you get people on board who are initially opposed? I think I found it here. You've all referenced active transportation, cycling, walking, etc., as a significant tool to reducing urban emissions. However, the research is clear that active transportation uptake is difficult without the supporting infrastructure. Policymakers and urban planning types universally agree that infrastructure is necessary, but implementation often hits a wall, except in a few select cities. What specific tools have you found helpful in countering NIMBY-like opposition to active transport infrastructure in your communities? And you've all had success, so maybe you can speak to the techniques you use to move this agenda forward.
One thing we're doing this year is, not only updating our zoning bylaw, but following that, our design standard guidelines. So it's going to dictate, when it's a residential street, this is the sidewalks and this is the width. And as opposed to neighborhood by neighborhood, like we're reconstructing this neighborhood, and we had one neighborhood come out against the sidewalk. They were like, no, it's going to take away our parking, and council caved and took the sidewalk out. And now the neighborhood, 2 years later, is all of a sudden full of families and they want a sidewalk. Well, the road's not getting reconstructed for another 50 years. So there's no sidewalk. So instead of having those street by street discussions, we're having municipal wide. These are design guidelines. This is how roads get built in Yellowknife from a residential perspective, or if you're on a main artery, this is what it looks like.
It's not just Yellowknife where that happens, by the way. I can give you lots of examples. Yep. Walking distance from my house in Toronto, where people have fought against sidewalks. No, it's something that's pretty inconsiderate for people going through the neighborhood. But anyway, any comments, Mayor Breen or Mayor Helps, about how you get, how you've succeeded in moving forward walking and cycling kinds of initiatives?
David, we're in the midst of it right now. We've come out with a bicycle plan that to help encourage bicycling in the city. It's met with a lot of concern over the sharing of paths between cyclists and pedestrians. And we also have to make it wheelchair accessible. We also need to have the ability for people with strollers and other people to use these multi-use trails. And it's really created a problem and a lot of discussion, because the trails have always been pedestrian trails in the city. So trying to do that is a challenge. And I think we have one that's just got approved to be built. That goes east-west, and we're expecting that to be started soon. I think finishing it with another one, I think we're going to end up with a separate trail. Is my thought on it. It's going to be very close to the other one. It's going to be separate, and then over time, I think you just got to take the mystery and and let the experience take care of itself when it comes to these.
Mayor Helps.
Yeah, well, I know that David spends some time in Victoria from time to time, so he's probably been reading all the letters to the editor and everything over the years. It's been a shocking challenge how difficult it is to build. So we're building a 32-kilometer all ages and abilities network that will connect 90% of Victorians will live within 400 meters of the bike network once it's constructed. And we were supposed to have it done. It was supposed to be a 4-year project. Obviously, that's not politically or technically feasible, really. So we're going to be done by the end of 2022, and every corridor is its own fight for different reasons. And I think what's made it successful is that we just didn't stop. There were some people that said, build one corridor, on one street, one protected bike lane, and just see how it goes. Well, that's like running, and you probably all heard this analogy, but that's like running electrical wire 3/4 of a way to a house and not all the way to the house, so you can't actually turn on your power. So we're building the network, and as we had the first 5 kilometers done, and it's been transformational. People are actually starting to see how does this work. Seniors who weren't riding their bikes because they were scared or hadn't been out on a bicycle in a long time now have, now we're up to about 9 or 10 kilometers, an actual network to use. And so it's really that once you get to the critical mass or minimum grid, I guess as it's called, of connectivity, people start to see how it works. And so I guess the short answer is you just have to, or we've just had to build it, prove the concept, and then that gives us a bit more social license to keep going. But it is, every corridor is still a fight. It's very surprising to see, but that's what's necessary. So we'll continue to do it.
Not people's image of Victoria, by the way. It's the images that people are wide open for things like cycling and so forth.
Right, I know.
This panel's flown by, and I think there's a comment in the chat about how impressive the mayors have been. I'm certainly not surprised. Each of their cities are superb examples of a mid-sized city that's really innovative and a leader. We've got 1 minute each left, mayors. One thing we didn't get to was how economic and social and environmental sustainability all come together, although Mayor Breen hinted at it. The other thing we didn't get to was a great question about, do you motivate people with hope or fear? There's all sorts of other questions and answers. Floor is yours, whatever you want to say in the final sequence. I think we'll give the last word to Mayor Helps, then Mayor Breen, and then the last word to Mayor Alty.
Thanks. Well, I just want to say that I'm so glad that this conference is being held to look at the constitutional space for cities, because there are so many challenges facing the world right now. And while I won't pretend that cities have all the answers, cities have many of the answers, many of the solutions. And most of all, I think that the wherewithal, the grit, the determination, and the can-do spirit to help. And so, just thanks for organizing this conference, and curious to see what comes out of it, and hopefully some real change.
Mayor Breen.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the panel. It was a great discussion, and all I can say is that strong communities make a strong country, and the more that we can work together with our partners in our community and our partners at other levels of government, the better we'll all be. Remembering that municipalities, we're responsible for about 60% of Canada's infrastructure. And we're getting 10% of the tax dollars, less than 10% of the total tax dollars. So we've got to be doing something right. So that's thanks very much for having me.
Mayor Alty, the last word.
Yeah, I think just the fact that we all need to work together, because climate change doesn't respect boundaries. And so extended producer responsibility when it comes to waste management, a big thing that municipalities alone can't deal with. We've got to work with the territories, the provinces, and the federal government to address some of those big wastes. So lots of work to do in this space. Well,
fantastic. On behalf of everyone, I want to thank you all, and I'm going to applaud because one of the weird things about Zoom is there isn't applause. You've each had a very overwhelming year. And the role of mayors in COVID times is really emphasized, because even though it's provincial health and federal vaccine, people still look to the mayor. And it's been a real privilege to be part of this panel and moderating it. I want to thank you each for taking significant time out of your schedule to be on here. And thanks again to Massey College, the CUI, and others for organizing the session. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.